SQL Plus and iSQL Plus. I'm going to show you in this nugget how to use SQL Plus to tap into your database. Now, you're probably wondering, come on, isn't this a DBA course? Aren't we going to do some complex things? Well, we need to start somewhere. You need to have a user interface and you need to be proficient in it if you're going to be an efficient DBA. Now, the reason why we use SQL Plus instead of other graphical tools out there is that it comes bundled with every version of Oracle. And oftentimes as a DBA, you're only going to have access to some remote databases out there without any GUI interface at all. So first we're going to connect to our database. I'll show you some really neat editor shortcuts. We'll do some spooling to some files, so save the evidence, and then we'll configure our environment as well as create and run dynamic scripts. And then the very last thing I'll show you in this nugget is how to use iSQL Plus, which is just a browser-based version of SQL Plus. It's a really neat tool. So let's get started. So let's log into SQL Plus. SQL Plus is an executable file. We can get to that by going to our command prompt and typing in SQL Plus. That is under the Oracle Home bin directory, but really you can launch it from anywhere since that executable should be in your path environment variable. I'll show you that in just a moment. So we hit SQL Plus. It prompts us for the username. I'm going to type in Scott. Scott is one of those built-in usernames that you can turn on when you install Oracle. And by default, the password for Scott is Tiger. So when I type that in, it doesn't show up on the screen, but I am typing it in. Okay, so it looks like we're in. Now you can have several databases installed on the same machine. So when we typed in SQL Plus, how did it know which database to connect to? Well, it knows by an environment variable called Oracle SID. In fact, I'm going to go back to the operating system prompt. We type in host to get there, and I'm going to echo Oracle _ SID. If you're in Unix or Linux, you would put a $sign in front of the Oracle SID and make sure that all those letters are uppercase. Okay, so it looks like our SID is ORCL. If I had a second database on this machine, then it would have a different SID. It's just a unique identifier. Okay, good. So to get back to our prompt, our SQL Plus prompt, we can hit exit, and there we go. Now, what if you're managing hundreds of databases and you forget who you're logged in as, or you forget what SID you're logged in into? Well, you can just type in defined and it will display some predefined variables here. For example, the connect identifier is ORCL, that's our SID. The _user, that's Scott. And some of these others, we will eventually cover all of these, but the _date obviously is the current date and so on. So looks good. How about if you want to log in as a different user and you're already in SQL Plus? Well, you don't have to exit SQL Plus and relaunch it. What you can do is type in connect and then the username and the password. So we can say connect sys as sysdba. Now sys is a username. SysDBA is a special privilege. It gives you root-like privileges so you can do anything to the database. So whenever we say a username as sysdba or as sysopper, it means that we're using this special privilege. And I'll show you in a later nugget how to define who gets to implement these actual privileges. Okay, so it prompts us for our password, and I go ahead and type it in. Okay, now we're going to type in define and see how it now tells us that we're sys as sysdba. I want to show you one more way of logging in. Earlier when we logged in as Scott, we just said SQL Plus Scott and then hit enter, and then it prompted us for the password. We can actually give the password on the same line. For example, we can say connect Scott / Tiger. Now, you can do this, but it's not a recommended method, and the reason why is for security. On some Unix and Linux systems, if you type in the password on the same line as the username, then when you are when you're executing the PS command to show all your processes, sometimes that password will show up, and that's a pretty big security breach. So try not to do this. And then to exit out of here, we can just type in quit. And we're back at our prompt. Every table in the database belongs to a particular schema, and that schema will match up with somebody's username. So what we're looking at right now is scott.emp. So we've got the Scott schema, the emp table space, and here's the structure of our table. Looks like we've got several columns. We have the emp number, e-name, job, manager, hire date, salary, commission, and department number. Now, if I'm logged in as Scott, I don't have to fully qualify scott.emp. I can just say emp. Okay, if I'm logged in as somebody else, then of course I'll have to say, select star from scott.emp. I'll have to fully qualify it. Now, each of these columns has a particular data type attached to it. For example, the data type might be a number, which can be either integers or floating point numbers. For example, if you have number with 3 in parentheses, that means it has to be an integer up to 3 digits. Or you might have something like this, a number 2, comma 2. That means a precision and a scale of 2. In other words, a value like 0.23 would be a valid value for that data type. As far as characters are concerned, if you're dealing with varchar2, that's a data type that's dealing with variable characters. In other words, if we have varchar2 with the 10 in parentheses, it means we can store up to 10 characters. Okay, so if you have the last name of Smith in there, really only 5 characters are going to be stored. 5 bytes will be stored. So that's what makes it variable. There's another character data type called char, and if you have a data type that looks like that, even if your last name is something short, it will still store 10 characters. So it's not as efficient as varchar2. Another data type we've got is date. Okay, date's pretty straightforward. It stores the year, day, month, hour, and minute, and seconds. It does not store milliseconds. We do have another data type called timestamp, which stores the milliseconds in addition to all the other information. So those are our basic data types. There are some more complex data types that we're not going to get into full detail in this course, but you might hear of what we call LOBs. That stands for large object. So for example, if you've got a binary large object, we call it a blob. If you have a character large object, that's a clob, and so on. So we will touch on this a little bit more later, but not in depth. So we're logged in as Scott. And we want to find out which table Scott owns. So we'll say select table name from user tables. And what do we get? We get 4 tables. Now, if we want to hone in on one of these tables and look at all the particulars, we can do a describe, or DESC for short. Describe emp. So here we have 8 columns in this table. And it shows us the data types, and this not null simply means that whatever data we enter, the emp number must always be populated. Let's run a query for Scott. Okay, we're going to grab the emp number, e-name, job, hire date, and salary from emp, order by 2. 2 is the e-name. Okay, second column in that select clause. A couple things for you to notice. In our query, we have a number 2 and number 3. Those are just line numbers to help us keep track of where we are in the query. And by default, the headings are going to be displayed for every page. So it looks like the default page setting here is set to 12. So 12 rows. Every 12 rows, we're going to get a heading. We can reset that to something else by saying set page size, and then whatever that size is, so 200. Now, if I want to re-execute what's in my buffer, I just hit a /, and see how the formatting is a little bit different. We only get one heading. Now at any given point, there's going to be only one query in your buffer. Your buffer can only hold one statement. If you want to see what's in that buffer, just type in L, or you can type in list. The star next to the 3 just means that 3 is the current line number. We can set that to something else by simply typing in the line number. For example, we can type in 1. Now there's a star next to it. If we want to change emp number to department number, it's simple. The C stands for change. Then we have a / and the text that we're going to replace, and then the text that we're going to replace it with. Okay, we hit enter, and now this is what our new line number 1 looks like. If you want to see the whole statement, just type in L. or list. Okay, so that's what's in our buffer. Remember, to re-execute what's in the buffer, you can simply type in a /. We've already issued a combination of SQL statements and SQL Plus statements, and I want to clarify to you what the difference between these two things is. First of all, SQL stands for Structured Query Language. It's used by a lot of different relational database systems, not only Oracle, but also Microsoft SQL Server, Postgres, MySQL, and so on. And so all of these different types of database systems use this technology called SQL to extract information from the database. So a lot of times people will call Microsoft SQL Server simply SQL, and that's actually not 100% accurate. Okay, it's SQL Server, so please don't mix up the two. SQL Plus is an Oracle-specific tool to let you tap into the database. Think of it as the interface. You need to have some kind of program that lets you get into the database. Now, SQL Plus is not the only tool out there, but it does automatically come bundled with the Oracle download. So what you're seeing on the left-hand side here in red are examples of SQL statements. Select star from emp. That would grab all of the rows in our emp table. Our second example, delete from emp where job equals manager. That would delete every row in our table where the job is equal to manager. We also have examples of insert statements. Here we're just inserting a row. Joe Schmo, his employee number is 9999 and he's a sales rep. Commit, that just means to save the data that you've already manipulated. Rollback is the opposite of commit. It says undo all of the information since the last commit or rollback. Okay, so now on to SQL Plus commands. Notice that none of these commands have a semicolon at the end. If you were to put a semicolon there, it wouldn't hurt anything. It's just not required. So any of your set commands or any of your column formatting commands are all SQL Plus. Well, why do we make a distinction between SQL and SQL Plus? Well, the big reason here is because when we're dealing with our buffer, which we'll talk about in just a moment, you'll see the difference. When you issue a SQL statement, whatever your last SQL statement is, that will get saved in the buffer. Your SQL Plus statements do not get saved in the buffer. So you see here that there's lots of SQL Plus statements that help you format your output. Now keep in mind that this formatting is only good for the session. In other words, if I issue this set line size statement, it's only good until I set it to something else within the session. If I exit out and then get back into SQL Plus, it's forgotten everything. Now if I put these SQL Plus statements inside of a script, then they stick with that script. Now we've got 14 rows of output. Looks like Smith here was hired in December of 1980. We're assuming 1980. How do we know it's not 2080? Well, by issuing an alter session set NLS date format to a different format, we can change that. So it looks like our session has been altered. Now we can re-execute what's in there. Select department number, and so on. And see how our date looks a little better? So yes, indeed, this person was hired in 1980. Boy, I think I was wearing purple leg warmers that year. I must have been in 6th grade. Oh, I just dated myself. Okay, let's take a look at the salary. Do we like this salary? Well, I hope this is monthly and not yearly. Let's format it. A SQL Plus statement to format a column is like this. You say column, or just COL for short, then the column name, format, and here we're putting a $sign and we're putting commas every 3 digits. The .00 means to display those numbers no matter what after the decimal point. Okay, so we go ahead and re-execute our statement by issuing /. There we go. Looks a little bit better. Describe, column, set, those are all SQL Plus statements. They're not saved in the buffer. That's why we could hit a / and it would re-execute our statement. Now, the alter session statement, that was actually a SQL statement and that was put in our buffer. Now let's change our heading. Our e-name heading up here, I don't like that. Let's change it to say employee name. Since I want those two words to appear on different lines, I'll separate them by the pipe character. So now re-execute it. Looks a little bit better. We can do the same thing with our salary. We can say column, sal, heading, salary. By default, your headings will have these little dashes. You can change that to something else with the set command. Here we're changing the dash to an equal sign. That looks a little bit different. Let's add another column to our query. So here's our query. And I want to tack something on to the end of line 1. So the way we do that is we first make line number 1 be our current line. Now we can use the append statement or just A for short. Make sure you do 2 spaces after the A, and then you specify what you want to tack on. Okay, so here we'll do a comma, and let's also list the commission. Okay. Now, those 2 spaces are only necessary if you want the first character that you're adding to be a space. I'm just showing you how to do that. Never put in quotes because the quotes will automatically go in the query. So we re-execute it, and some of our employees have commissions. Our commission column is also a monetary data type, so wouldn't it be nice to have the formatting look like the salary formatting? Well, one shortcut for doing that is to say col, com, like, sal. Now it's also a good idea to specify what the heading is going to look like, otherwise it will have the same heading as the salary. Not a good idea. So here we'll say heading commission. Now we go ahead and re-execute that. That looks great. Let's also make the job column be a little bit wider, so we can say call job format, and let's say A15. Great. How about undoing any of your formatting for the columns? You do that with the clear command. For example, if I want to clear the commission formatting, I say call com clear. If I want to clear it for all of the columns, I'll say clear columns. Now this is not going to affect the hire date because remember, hire date is a data type and that can only be manipulated by NLS date format, altering the session like I showed you earlier. Okay, so looks good. Keep in mind that your buffer is only going to save the last SQL statement that you executed. So you can imagine how frustrating it can be if you have this really long SQL statement and then you issue this other SQL statement, then your original one is gone. Unless, of course, you save the SQL statement to a file. And the way we do that is with the save command. So here's what's in our buffer. We can simply say save, and then we specify our own file name with the .SQL extension. So we'll call this allemp.sql. Okay, so now, where is this file going to be saved? It will be saved in the directory from where we launched SQL+. If you want to save it to a different directory, that's fine. Just put the full path. How about executing your statement or executing whatever is in your file? You can say @allemp. Let me show you one more example. Let's change up our query. So instead of saying order by to for line 3, we're going to say where job equals president. Okay, so this is what our query looks like. We can save this, and we'll give a full path this time. We'll put it in the temp directory and call it president.sql. Okay, so let's execute the president. Okay, that didn't sound really good, but you know what I mean. Okay, so the way we execute that is C:\temp president. We do not have to put the .SQL extension. There we go. As a DBA, you're going to use this a lot. I have hundreds of DBA scripts that help me along to find things like table spaces that need to be shrunk down, things like that. So far, all of our output has just been splashed to the screen. I'd like to keep a hard copy of all the stuff that's been going on, so we can issue the spool statement to do that. It's kind of like the T command in Unix and Linux, where it goes both to the screen and to a file. So if I say spool output.txt, and then I issue some statements, for example, execute what's in my buffer, do all sorts of things like that, I can issue as many statements as I want to, and then when I'm finished with my spooling, I say spool off. So what I've done here is all this output has gone to a file called output.txt, which is in the same directory from where I launched SQL+. In fact, I'm going to go to the OS level, and I'm going to type in type, which is a DOS command, shows us the contents of our file. I'll say output.txt, and there's our stuff. And what's new to Oracle 10G is the ability to append stuff to an already existing file. For example, we already have our file called output.txt. I've turned the spooling off. I'd like to add some stuff to that file. So I get back to my SQL Plus prompt, and I'm going to issue another statement that's completely different. I'll just say, select star from department. Okay. Now, how about putting this output, appending it to the file? So we'll say spool output.txt append. Now let's execute the statement and then turn our spooling off. Now we can look at the contents. Host type output.txt. You see how it's been tacked on the end here? Very nice. So we can also use a text editor to modify our query. Here's what's in our buffer. If you type in edit, or ed for short, it's going to launch a text editor. In this case, in Windows, it's going to launch most likely Notepad. If you're in Unix or Linux, it will either launch VI or ED. Now, I see some of you already cringing when I say the word VI. That's okay. We can modify our editor to be something else. I'll show you that in just a moment. We make whatever modifications we want to our query, and we save it, and then exit out. You'll see that our query is now changed, and we re-execute it. Okay, looks good. There's a built-in variable called underscore editor. If you want to see what that's set to, you can say define underscore editor, and here it says Notepad. If you want to change it to something else, that's fine. All you do is say define underscore editor equals, and then whatever the path is to that program. Just like that. Back to our query. There's our buffer. Now, let's change our where clause. Make line 3 our current line. Do a quick little change. And we're going to replace the word president with a variable. Variables are defined with an ampersand. So ampersand P. So now let's execute it. Now we're prompted for a value. So we've got an interactive script going on. Okay. I just pulled the variable P out of my head. I mean, it could have been anything. It could have been X. If you've got a variable that you're going to use twice in a statement, then you can use the double ampersand so you won't be prompted twice for it. In other words, let's just shake this query up a little bit. For line 3, I'll add a where clause. Okay, where salary is greater than double ampersand X and commission is greater than double ampersand X. Okay, so let's execute the query by hitting /. It prompts me once. It only prompts me the first time for X. So I'll put in 1,000, and 1,000 gets plugged in twice. So here on the old line, it shows us what our original statement looks like, and new shows us how it got plugged in. Okay, so what's interesting about this is if I hit / again to re-execute it, I won't be prompted for anything because it's already, that value is already set. So how do we undefine that variable? Well, you simply say undefine X. Okay, so now you can hit /, now you're prompted again. So I'm going to hit 1200 this time. There we go. Now there's one more type of variable that I just want to briefly mention, and that's what we call bind variables. A bind variable is one that is defined in SQL+, and then it's used within a PL SQL block. Well, we're not covering PL SQL quite yet, but we will get to that later. Okay, just to show you how to create one of those variables, you'd say var, and then the name and the data type. So that's all I'm going to mention about it now, and we will come back to this. As a DBA, you'll often want to go to the OS level and look at files, copy files, move them around. So here we're going to type in host to get to the OS level. There we go. And now if we want to see our text file, we'll just use the wild character, myfile.txt. It's there. Notice we're still at our OS prompt. If we want to get back to our SQL Plus prompt, type in exit. In fact, if you just have a one-time OS command that you want to execute, you can type in host and then the command. And you're immediately taken back to your SQL plus prompt. Here's another example. We can look at the contents of my file. So we'll say host type myfile.txt. There we go. I've made a nice interactive script called department changes. Let's take a look at it. And all it has is 4 SQL statements. The first 3 lines are really just SQL plus formatting, which are going to affect the 2 select statements down here. So our first select is just splashing all the employees to the screen. Then we're going to echo to the screen. Your department is getting a fat 50% raise. That prompt command is a SQL plus command, and think of that as an echo statement. Okay, now to make our script interactive, we need to prompt the user for some data. So when we say accept and some variable name, prompt, and then a string, really what this is doing is splashing the screen to the screen and then prompting for a variable, D. Okay, so we're going to type in the number 20 for our department and then update emp, set sal equals sal times 1.5. Let's get that nice 50% raise where department number equals D. So your D is actually getting set up here. Okay, so in this statement down here, our D is also going to get plugged in from above. And then last but not least, we're going to splash all the employees to the screen again just to see the effect. Okay, so let's go ahead and execute this. We'll say department changes. And it asks us, what is your department number? Well, it's 20. Okay, so it looks like 5 rows were updated. 1 row was deleted. We got rid of our manager. Isn't your life a lot better? And here's what our data now looks like. Looks like our salary is a little higher now. That's good. Some queries that you execute are going to give you lots and lots of records back, and you want to be able to actually paginate through that stuff. For example, if we're querying from all tables, that's showing us all the tables in the database that we have access to. Well, look at all these results coming back. I mean, what if I had 1,000,000 records coming back? Could I really scroll all the way up? I don't think so. So the set pause on command does just that. It paginates your output. So let's re-execute our statement. The first time you get the page, you actually have to hit enter twice. Okay, there's our first page, there's our second page, and so on. Okay, once again, if you want to make your page sizes larger, you can do that. For example, set page size 35. Now let's re-execute that. Looks a little better, doesn't it? Well, the set pause on command is one of those commands that I always want to have turned on. So what we can do is put that statement inside of an initialization script. In SQL Plus, the script is called login.sql. It's a lot like .profile if you've dealt with Unix or Linux. In order to use it, you have to have an environment variable called SQL path on your OS level. Okay, so I'm going to type in host set SQL path, see what it's set to. Okay, it's set to my Oracle product directory. So it's in that directory that I want to have my file called login.sql. And I can put whatever SQL plus statements I want to in there. And so here's our file called login.sql, and it's used by each and every user on the database system. Now, as the DBA, you can also create a file called glogin.sql, and that's kind of like the etc profile file in Unix and Linux. It affects everyone, and then their individual login.sql will overwrite what you've got. We've only covered a handful of SQL Plus commands. I want to show you where to find the full list and how to use it. So we can type in help and the keyword index. So that's the complete list right there of SQL Plus commands. Now, if you want to find out more detailed information, you can say help and then the command. For example, help define. That shows us the proper syntax. So one of the commands in here is ttitle. That stands for top title, and we also have btitle for bottom title. So you can kind of do some real basic report formatting. So here we're setting our ttitle to be top of my page, btitle is bottom of my page. The page size is 200. Now we execute our query. Woo! Went right off the page. Now why did that happen? Well, we set our page size to 200 lines. So woo, there we go. So we can change the page size by saying set page size, give it a more appropriate number like 50. Okay, looks a little bit better. So if you're going to print out a report, just make sure that you have the appropriate number of lines. I think 55 lines. One other useful command you'll find in here is password. So if the user needs to change his or her password, type that in. Let's look at the official definition. Okay, so we say PASSW, that's the shortcut. And we specify our old password and then our new password. Okay, password changed. Notice that you can specify a username. That's only if you're logged in as a SysDBA. So if you need to change someone's password, that's the quickest way to do it. The last thing we're going to cover in this nugget is ISQL+. ISQL+ is glorified SQL+. It's browser-based. What I find really nice about this tool is that we'll be able to run queries and not have to worry about all the formatting and line wrapping and all that ugly stuff that sometimes is time-consuming. The other really nice thing about this tool is that if you have users that are all over the place, they can just access the same database through their browser. So if they have any issues such as firewalls, security, it's a little bit easier through this tool. In order to access ISQL+ from a browser, you need to make sure that the HTTP daemon is running in the background. And so on the application server machine, which I have everything on one machine in my case, you're going to issue the ISQL+ control start command. And of course, to stop that server, you say stop instead of start. Okay, so we hit enter and it tells us that ISQL+ is started. Then you just open up a browser, you type in your host name. Since everything is on the same machine for me, I just type in localhost. If it's on a different machine, then you're going to either type in the IP address or the machine name, and you can do some ping testing. We'll talk about more details of networking later. And then the default port number is 5560. Now you might have this port number reserved for something else, but you can also always go into the configuration files and change it to some other number. Then /ISQL+, we hit enter, and it takes you to this login screen. So here it's prompting us for the username and password. And the connect identifier is used if the database is on a different machine from the HTTP server, or actually on a different machine from where you are. In this case, we don't need the connect identifier since everything is locally on our machine. And then we log in. It takes you to a window where you can execute your SQL statements, type them in, and just hit the execute button. Once you execute it, you might have to scroll down a little bit to see your results. So there we go. Notice how we didn't have to worry about any of the lines wrapping. They will never wrap. Let me show you another example. Here we're querying a table that has a lot of columns in it. We go ahead and execute it and see how here's all of our results. We might have to scroll over to the right a little bit, but here we didn't have to worry about any of the lines wrapping. And take a look at this. Up in the right-hand corner, we've got history. Here's a history of all your commands. So see, in ISQL+, we can have more than one item in your buffer, which you can't do in regular SQL+. So this is what I really like. Now let's talk about configuring that port number. If we can't use port 5560, we want to use something else, let's say 4499 or whatever number you like, we can do that quite easily. Right now I'm currently in my Oracle home directory, and we're going to navigate to the directory that contains our configuration file. So we go to our OC4J, J2EE, ISQL+ config directory, and there you will see http website.xml. We can go ahead and edit that with a simple notepad or whatever editor you like. And we do a search for the number 5560 or whatever the last port number was used. Okay, there it is. This is where we can change it. Let's change it to 4499 and save it. Notice how I stopped our HTTP server using ISQL plus control stop, and then we can issue the start command. Then when you launch your browser, just make sure you put the proper port number up there. If you don't want to mess around with putting any port number in there at all, port 80 is the default port. In other words, if you go to that configuration file, set it to 80, then you can simply type in localhost/SQL+. Now, to access iSQL Plus as the sysdba or as sysopper, you need to do the following steps. First of all, you're going to create users for the iSQL Plus DBA URL. And once you create that user and you grant them the appropriate role, in this case web DBA role, then when the user tries to access the web page, a little box will pop open prompting for their username and password. But for the server to see the changes that you've made, you actually have to bounce the server, and then of course you can access the web page. Notice that the URL is just slightly different. We've tacked on DBA at the end of the URL. So the first thing we're going to do here is make sure that we are in our Oracle Home, OC4J, J2EE, iSQL Plus, Application Deployments, iSQL Plus directory. It's really important that you execute these commands from this directory. It will not work otherwise. You also need to make sure that your Java home is set to your Oracle Home JDK directory, or you can have it point to some other Java home, at least as long as you've got, some version of Java that's 1.4 or higher. Then to create a user for our web page, we need to invoke what we call the JASN shell. So I know this is a long command, bear with me. Here's our directory that we're in. We're going to execute Java. We're passing in the property of java.security.properties. And here we're passing in the value of OC4J, J2EE, home, config, jasn.security.props. Boy, that's long. Okay, then we're actually going to be executing a jar file. That's what this next argument is. It's the jasn.jar. Then we're specifying a user. So here we're specifying that we're creating a user that's going to have DBA admin privileges. And then the password of welcome, that's actually the default password. You can use your shell to change that password. That's how we're going to execute the shell. And then the last argument is -shell. Okay, so here we go. We hit enter. And we are now in our JASN shell. So from here we can add users. If you want to see which users have the iSQL Plus DBA role, go ahead and type in list users. So see here I created a couple users earlier. Now let's add another user. We're going to create user Joe and his password will be cool guy. You want to see the users again? There's Joe. The next step is to grant Joe the proper privileges. So grant role web DBA, iSQL Plus DBA, and his name. Okay, remember to bounce our HTTP server. So let's exit out of this shell. Remember iSQL Plus, CTL, stop. Okay, and now we're going to go ahead and start it. And we should just be able to go to our browser and access it. So we typed in our URL up here, our host name, port number, iSQL Plus /DBA, and this is that box I was telling you about. So his name was Joe. We enter in his password, and we should get there. Here we go. So now we can log in sys as sysdba. So remember how I said sysdba is a special privilege? You actually have the two choices, sysdba or sysopper, and we'll talk about the differences of those later. Okay, so sys as sysdba, we type in his password and log in. Yay, we're in! Now we can do anything we want to the database. So you should feel pretty comfortable now connecting and disconnecting using SQL+, as well as using your editor shortcuts. Remember ED to launch your editor, A to append, C to change, and so on, as well as saving your evidence to a file, so spooling to a file. And hopefully you'll now modify your environment to make your personal settings more permanent. Okay, remember that environment variable called SQL path? Remember to modify that. Okay, as well as creating dynamic scripts using those variables that we talked about. And then last but not least, you should feel really comfortable using iSQL Plus. This is a wonderful tool. Okay, well, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.